Welcome back. Now that we got this computer up and running, I think it's time to put Windows on it. Now the problem I've been thinking about in the last day and a half, I'd say, was whether or not I want to put Windows 7 or Windows 10 on this machine. Now you may remember originally I spoke on this computer about having Windows 7 and then I upgraded to Windows 10. And the thing about that is there's just the general activation that's done, and your key isn't actually used for the Windows 10 installation, which means you have a file on the server, on Microsoft server, and what happens is when you reinstall Windows 10, you're just basically confirming your hardware with the server and they just activate you. Which Windows 7 you have to put the key in, and I think that's the case with 8. I'm not really sure. But the thing about it is that key is still technically active as a Windows 7 key. So I should be able to put the disk in here and load Windows 7 and use the key that's already attached up here to the top of the case. I haven't actually ever tried that before with an OEM version of Windows. I've read online, I've heard a lot of people say it's no problem with the retail version because you own it, you can transfer it from machine to machine. But from what I understand, you can't do that with an OEM version. Well, I just happen to have an OEM version here, and this is what I originally put on. And you could tell it's an OEM version because it says so right on the disk here somewhere. Intended for distribution with a new PC. So this is what you would get with a brand new computer, and they load it on the factory for you, and this is just your backup disk. So of course, me being a system builder, I'd be able to use something like this. Now you want to use these because you can see I paid $139 for it, and this was back on 12/28/11, and I actually bought this to replace Windows XP. And also, by the way, around the same time I bought the Windows Home Server 2011 edition, which was 49 bucks, which I thought was a steal. And that's a pretty cool program. I've been using that every day actually since then. But Windows 7 though, you know, I want to go with this. Now I decided that because you know, I just like Windows 7 a little better, honestly. I went to Windows 10 for quite a while. In fact, I had the anniversary update, and there are some things I definitely like about it. I just don't know if I'm going to be able to get 10 back on this. Now, I looked up just now to see when the end of service life is going to be on Windows 7, and it's not till 2020. And that's extended service, so you're no longer going to be seeing it in newer machines unless it's a downgrade version, but you will see obviously support for it still on Microsoft's website and through drivers and whatnot until 2020, which is a good thing. Now, part of the reason why I didn't just opt for a new operating system on this was because, well, Windows 7 was $139, as you saw. Windows 10 is $149 right now, and I'd want the professional version because that's always what I've worked with. All the machines I have in here are on the professional setup, and you know, I can get away with home, but I just want Pro. Like we'll just keep it that way. There's no real reason to explain why. I just want Pro. So that's what I got, and that's what I'm going to stick with. So we're going to go ahead and try to load this. Now, if you remember when I built this, I mentioned there's no IDE ports on here, so I can't just use the IDE drive that I have. I have two of these because I don't have this connection, and I don't have a SATA hard disk drive. So what are we to do? Well, fortunately, I store all of my installation DVDs like this on the server here as an ISO file, which is basically just a file version of that CD, and we're going to load it onto this USB drive. And this is a 8 gigabyte SanDisk Cruiser, and this is actually a Cruiser Ultra, if I remember correctly. It has a little bit faster speed than the older SanDisk Cruiser that I have. But anyway, with that, I'm going to switch over here to the server, which I'm kind of using as a little workstation here. You're not really supposed to do that, as you can see by the caution. You're really meant to just log into this remotely and access whatever you need to do, again, remotely. But since I've been without a computer for a few days, this is what I've been using. Now, I don't really use this to check email and do all that stuff. I just use this for working on the computer, doing diagnostic work, stuff like that. You could probably see some of the icons on the desktop here, like the recovery and folder to ISO and all that kind of stuff. But I want to show you some of these things so you can get a better understanding on how they work. The very bottom right over here, I have a program called folder to ISO. And when we actually run this, it'll ask you to select a folder and select an output. So the folder is going to be obviously whatever folder you'd like. So in this computer at one point, I went in and picked the optical drive, which is drive G in this particular machine, and set that to be my folder here. And then the output, what I usually do is I have a folder here called Program Installer File Archive, and then there's one called Program ISO Files, and these are all different ISO files for various bits of software. And I have Windows 3.1 all the way up to Windows 10 in here. So you'll see there's Windows 7 Professional X64, and then there's regular Professional. I have Home Premium and Ultimate, and I have all these in here. But the Professional X64 is what we're going to go with. Now, I already did that, so there's no reason to run this, but what you would have done here is hit Generate ISO, and it would go ahead and make that file for you based off that CD. So the next bit of software that I'll show you would be to take that ISO file and burn it to a USB drive. And that's this folder here, and this is called USB to ISO appropriately. And this is a very simple program to use. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It works kind of sort of how the folder to ISO program worked, but obviously it's the reverse. So before I get any further, I'm going to take my USB stick and I'm going to insert that into the server here. And it will read, we'll see it just pop up there in the background. And then what I'll need to do here is hit browse, and then we're going to go to where that ISO file is. So we're looking for MS Windows 7 Professional X64, which is right here. And I'll hit open. And it's going to ask you to pick your USB drive, which is the second option here. And it'll tell you burning will erase all data on USB disk, which is fine, it's already empty. And we don't see it in here because I plugged it in while this program was running already, and it didn't automatically refresh. So I'll have to close out of here and reopen it. And hopefully it should read it now. Yeah, we'll see disk N here, 7.44 gigabytes. That's obviously the 8 gig drive. Let me just repick that ISO file. Hit open. And you can set a volume label. I'm just going to leave MS Windows. File system, you can set this, but I'm just going to leave it at the default FAT32. And then you have this option here which says bootable, only supports Windows ISO image. Well, obviously that's what we're using. And this works, by the way, with any ISO file that I've seen. So if you wanted to do this with a video game or anything like that, it should work fine. However, since this is a Windows ISO image, we're just going to hit this here. And it should remind you that you should only have one partition. Do not use on a USB which has multiple partitions. If create failed and USB is unusable, here's a recovery guide. I've really never had a problem with this. I've used the same drive every time though. And I'm just going to hit burn. And then it's going to give you a warning. Burning will erase all data. Yep. And for a bootable USB, it should only be one partition. It's just reminders. So I'll hit yes. And it's going to give you a little thing creating a bootable disk. And what should happen here is it's actually going to unmount from the system, and it's going to remount as it just did. And you'll say removable disk N. You can actually open it right now if you want and see that there are a couple files in here. And as you sit here, you'll see more of these populate in, because it's basically writing, it's reading that ISO file and writing all the contents to it directly to this drive. So in effect, it's basically like creating a CD or a DVD, not much different. Only thing obviously is that you're going to USB media as opposed to, you know, optical media. But I'm going to let this run. It does take a little while. You can see by the green status bar, it does have to go to the end, and that's a pretty large ISO file, a few gigabytes, maybe 4 gigabytes total. Now, while that's going, I'll show you something else that I did. I mentioned that the motherboard came with a CD for the various drivers that you would require to get it going. And what I did was went on to ASUS's website and downloaded all the more current versions. Now, I don't know exactly which versions are on that disk. I could have the newest version on that disk already, but I didn't want to chance that. So I decided just to download these right off the bat. And I did this both for Windows 7 and Windows 10, which is handy. I may not need the Windows 10 drivers, obviously, but they're there. And one of the things that you can download is a new BIOS file to upgrade, obviously, the BIOS. And it tells you the revision number, which I want to say it was 2702. And my motherboard was already set to that newest revision. So what happens, obviously, is as they manufacture these boards, they come up with new software, new drivers, the whole 9 yards. And at some point, there may be a hardware revision, so there might be a version 2.0, and then obviously that's going to have even newer drivers. And then as the progression of that drive goes, the motherboard goes through its lifespan, there's going to be constant, updates and stuff. And then at some point, they'll probably stop manufacturing it, and the versions that are out there will be obviously the latest version with the latest drivers on the disk, and you should be fine. But since I don't really know where in line my particular build fell compared to what's out there now, I figured it was just a safe bet just to download everything off the bat. Other things I did was I went to the EVGA website and downloaded the drivers for that. So my video card over here is all set to go with the latest and greatest drivers. So we can see that's right here, this little EVGA driver. We have the sound card, that's already set up there. And I even have the Intel graphics driver, which I got from Intel's website for this particular processor for the onboard graphics. So we can play with all that stuff. I wanted to try the onboard graphics just to see how they were. I mean, I'm not going to probably play any hardcore games or anything on it for sure, but I did want to see what kind of performance I got out of it. And obviously everything else over here is the drivers from ASUS's actual website. So you got your network driver, the audio, USB 3.0 drivers, the Smart Connect, Rapid Storage. These are all different drivers, even your chipset. And these are basically going to allow your computer to run in the right way. You actually get all these drivers with Windows, but they're generic, and obviously you want the driver that's meant for your particular hardware because you'll get all the features that are available to you on it. And there's other things on here like the AI Suite 3 and the BIOS revision just in case I needed it. Home Cloud, which I believe you can actually access your BIOS from the cloud. I have to check that out because it seems kind of neat. And there's other things on here, but I may or may not need those. But if I back up here, you can see here's the Windows 10. And it doesn't seem like there's as much there. Well, this is all just the drivers. The other stuff, like the AI Suite and all that, that runs on pretty much any version of Windows 7 and up. So you only need to really download that once. And then, of course, I have all the documents, like the spec sheets and all that fun stuff, because, it's fun to look at that stuff. And, you really get to see, like, for example, the Cooler Master cooler that I bought. If you open this thing up here, it'll tell you the exact specs of it. So when I go to pick out my case, I have all that right here in hand. And, it's handy to have. And, of course, this server is not the fastest. So little things like opening up PDF files take a little while, but that's to be expected. Yeah, you get the idea, but it's good having this stuff on hand. In fact, I actually downloaded all this stuff before I even purchased this, because this was basically what I wanted to go with. And then once I was pretty sure, I downloaded all this stuff and I looked it over and I said, yeah, that's it. Push the button, buy it. and I had everything on hand. The drivers, obviously, I downloaded after I knew which one I was actually purchasing, but all the tech sheets here and everything else, that's always handy. And I downloaded stuff for the hardware I already had just because I wanted to see what the specs were. But anyway, I'm kind of just digressing here. I just wanted to see how much further this was going to go. I will, of course, cut the film here in just a moment, so you don't have to sit and watch all this. But I just figured I would show you how to set this USB disk, basically we'll call it. Get this set up for installing Windows. And the reason why I showed you, I didn't get to it yet, but the reason why I showed you this drivers and stuff like that is because we're actually going to copy this folder onto that USB disk as well. So I have everything to set Windows up right off the bat. That'll definitely make that a lot easier. And actually, this is really the faster way to do it. I mean, obviously we're spending time on this machine waiting for that ISO file to get burned, but kind of in a perfect world, I would have that already on a USB stick. So when I go to do future installations, I already have it. And maybe even like a little cabinet or something like you would hang keys in, you know, one of those little locked cabinets with a door you open up, there's different key hangers in it. It wouldn't be a bad idea getting one of those, all these USB sticks hanging in there. Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, and then have like a diagnostics one, maybe have one with Linux on it, you know, that's not a really bad idea. I should do something like that because that would avoid this in the future, and then I just have to worry about putting whatever drivers I need on it. But in the meantime, I'm just going to take that and I'm just going to copy it and paste it over here and just let that copy over. You can see it's 2.23 gigabytes, so it is quite a bit of drivers and stuff, but a lot of that stuff I would have had to have downloaded. And then I could also do things like, well, since I'm using Windows 7, it needs an antivirus. I'm going to go with Microsoft Security Essentials, so I'll probably get that on here. I use other things like CCleaner and Malwarebytes and, you know, a bunch of other stuff, so I'll probably have that loaded on here. What I actually end up doing is this particular flash drive, I call it the PTS drive, and it actually has all that stuff on it already. Obviously not the Windows installation stuff, but it has all the diagnostic stuff and the antivirus, and I keep pretty current versions of that on there. And that actually just lives in my tool bag. So when I go to someone's place to do a job, I already have all that stuff right there. I can plug it in and work with it. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and let this go because it will take a little while longer for us to copy over, and we'll come back once I have some progress. After copying over the drivers to this USB flash drive, I also copied a program called Heavy Load X64 and Crystal Disk Mark. Now, the Crystal Disk Mark will allow me to check the speed of the hard drive, and Heavy Load will allow me to put some kind of a load onto the processor just so we can check to make sure it gets up to temperature and there's no issues with any like blue screens of death or anything like that during running Windows. And I can actually show you here the little message you get. It says burn the ISO file, the USB has been completed. So just hit OK in that and close. We no longer need that, and then we'll just eject this drive just like you would eject any other normal USB flash drive from your computer. And then obviously what I'll do is take that from the computer, and we're going to insert this directly into the front of the new machine. And this station I'm sitting at here has a 4-port KVM switch, so at the push of a little button here I can switch over and use the same monitor and setup here for this new computer. So I'll go ahead and hit the power button, and this should load up into the UEFI BIOS, and we're just going to hit delete or F2, whichever one you prefer doing. And we're in the actual program. This is of course the settings for the computer, the main settings we'll call it. And there's some things in here I do need to tweak. I did actually end up setting this to default just for this since the last video, just so I can go through and kind of play with all these settings on my own and figure out the best way to do this stuff. I do know one of the things I want to actually do here is go to the Easy Tuning Wizard at the top here and click that. And what this actually does is it overclocks the whole system kind of automatically. And it'll tell you that's obviously the frequency of the processor, the frequency of the memory. If I hit next, it'll ask me if I'm doing this for daily computing or gaming or media editing, which that's of course the option I'm going to pick, and hit next. And this was actually a pretty neat thing. Obviously I'm going to pick box cooler because I just have the standard stock cooler, but when I upgrade this I will be able to pick tower cooler, which of course will allow me to get other speeds. A little side note about this, I used to have a tuner for my Mustang, and it was kind of the same thing. It kind of asked you which fuel you were going to use it with after, you know, was it spirited driving, like that kind of thing, and then it asked you what kind of fuel, and that basically told you how much horsepower you're going to get out of the thing. So this is the same thing. You know, I can cool it with a better cooling device, and that will allow me to get more speed out of this thing because it can get hotter. But I'm just going to use box cooler for now, hit next, and then it's going to tell me that it's going to increase the CPU performance by 8% and the RAM up by 20%, which is great. And then we hit next. It reminds me if it becomes unstable, we can just undo this and go to the default. So I'll hit yes, and the computer should reboot. Sorry about the focus over here. Hello. And of course I'll go back into the BIOS here, and we can see that the XMP mode has been set to 1600 megahertz here. You can verify that at the top by clicking up here where it says DDR3 1600 megahertz. And we can also go over here for easy system tuning. We can set this by clicking here to ASUS Optimal, which is going to increase performance and decrease the energy saving in the quiet component, which is to be expected. So we'll save and exit again. Or actually, it's not going to let me make any changes here. So I'm going to hit cancel for now because I actually want to switch this. This is the boot priority. P1 up here is the SSD that's in here, and then this UEFI FAT SanDisk Ultra, that's our USB disk. So I'm going to put that up on top just by dragging and dropping, and that's going to allow us to boot right off that flash drive. So once I hit save and exit here, it's you can hit OK. Now there wasn't any settings to change, but it should automatically boot off that flash drive. So I'll let it just do its thing here for a moment. And you can hear the fan throttle up and throttle down every time you go through the settings here. And that's just going through post. We can see it is starting Windows. And we can see obviously it's starting to load the files. Now this is USB based, so this is going to go pretty quickly. And I don't intend on sitting here through the entire operation of Windows installation, but we will show you that's going to go by pretty quick. Now it's currently 12:11 a.m. just so we can get a baseline time here. So I'm just going to hit install now. And what this is actually going to do first, it's going to, I believe it's going to ask me what partition to install this on after we accept the licensing terms. So we're going to do a custom installation, which is a new copy. Now there's already 2 partitions on this because I did some playing around with this earlier. So I'm going to select one of these partitions here and go to drive options and hit delete. And it's going to tell you it contains recovery files. That's fine. Obviously, there's no data on here I need to worry about. If there was, I would have had it backed up already. That's what happened in the prior videos. So we'll just go ahead and hit OK. And we're going to do the same thing to this other partition here. We're going to delete it and hit OK. So we end up with 118.8 gigabytes of unallocated space. And Windows will automatically do its thing here. If you want, you can hit new and have it do it. But I'm just going to let it do its own thing and just hit next. And now it's going to start copying files. Now this is taking the files off of the USB drive and bringing them over to the hard drive, and you can see that's already done. And then it's going to expand the Windows files, which that's kind of self-explanatory. This is probably going to be the longest part of this particular process. So I will break right here. Time is 12:12. We'll see you in a few minutes. It's 12:14 and we're already at 34% expanded. It is now 12:18, and as you can see, it's completing installation. So that was about 7 minutes. give or take. It's 12:19 about now. So you can see that's pretty quick. Of course, obviously it's a brand new machine, but there are some things that obviously can be slightly improved here. I may have mentioned, I'm pretty sure I mentioned, that there's actually extra hardware that wasn't received yet, and that hardware is a faster SSD using a different connection on the motherboard. And of course, once I get that in my hands, there'll be a very good video on that. And that's actually going to be here probably in the next few days. So my intention actually is to just get Windows running on this, test it out, get some, you know, drivers installed and whatnot, just make sure everything's going to work right for me, and probably get my video software my video editing software on here, just to get the backlog of videos edited from the last week and maybe week and a half that I didn't have any computer at all. And that way I should be able to get that out of the way, and then when the new drive comes, instead of cloning this installation over, I'll probably just reinstall everything on the newer drive. Of course, I won't activate the Windows key until then. You do have 3 days to use the operating system, I believe, without getting any kind of harassment from Windows. But this is the point now where I can put the name of this, my name in, obviously. And it's going to name it Chris PC, which is fine. That's what the old one was named. Password, I'm just going to hit next on this for now. Product key, I'm just going to hit skip for now. Use the recommended settings, that's great. Set the time. And today is now Sunday the 9th. It is 12:21 according to this. It's about right. We'll give it a minute less because it is 12:21 on my clock on my desk here. Hit next, and it's just going to finalize the settings, prepare the desktop, and within just a few moments here we should actually be on our desktop. And that was like literally 10 seconds after I cut recording. Here we are again. You can see actually I have a network wire plugged into this computer, so it's actually searching for that right now. It did not find one, so that's, I might have to, maybe I don't have it plugged in, I can't see from where I'm sitting right now, so I'll have to check that out. But we can go in here right now and look in the control panel. I'll put this to small icons, which is what I like. And we'll go into device manager. And we can see there are some things that need some attention here. So we'll take a look at that. Obviously, we'll have to install all these devices. That's obviously all living on the USB memory stick, so we'll take a look at that. One thing I can do here, hopefully, is adjust the screen resolution to 1280 by 1024, which would make this a lot smoother looking. And the other thing we can do right now is we can go into computer here and right click, go to properties, and this will give us all the specs of the machine. Some of the important ones here, how much memory we have, the speed of the processor. We want to go ahead and verify that just to make sure what we were reporting in BIOS is actually being reported here into Windows, which it is. And you can see at the bottom of the screen there, it tells me that there are 3 days left until activation. That's fine. And it tells me that the system rating is not available. Now, I don't remember if this is part of Windows 10 or not, but I know Windows 7 definitely had it. So I'm going to go ahead and rate this computer real quick without any of the drivers on there so we can see what kind of results we get. And so what it did is gave me a result of a 1.0, which is determined by the lowest score. And that was the score it gave me for graphics and gaming graphics, because clearly I don't have the correct drivers installed, so it can't really utilize the hardware properly, nor do I have the graphics card installed. But what you can see is the processor, RAM, and the hard disk rated at 7.8. Now that scale is on a scale of 1.0 to 7.9. So in my eyes, according to Windows, this computer is pretty near perfect. Just on the rest of the stuff alone. Now, I can tell you, I'm pretty sure that the result from my old computer, the lowest rating was, I think, 5.9, and that was for 6 point something, and that was for the actual graphics card. But everything else, especially since I put the SSD in, that went higher, as you can see by the 7.8. But this number is actually higher in this build with the same drive because I have the SATA 3 connection as opposed to SATA 2. So just because this is a faster processor doesn't necessarily, you know, mean that my speed increased in the processing area alone. My speeds increased elsewhere on the board because I have access to just newer technologies. So of course now what I'm going to have to do is go through the process of installing all the drivers on here and rerunning this test and see how it works. And then what I'm probably going to do is just do some playing around on here with this graphics configuration versus using the external card. Of course, getting a brand new card would be the best way to go, but since I have to pay this machine off first before I can do something like that, that's obviously the way I'm going to go. So installing the drivers on here is going to be really easy. I'm just going to go into this MS Windows drive, which is again the USB drive, and we can actually go ahead and play with the drivers, which is under Win 7 x64, and we'll just install what's needed, probably starting with the graphics driver. That's going to be the big one, and that'll probably be the very first and only thing I'll do, and I'll go ahead and rerun the numbers here just to see what it comes up with. And of course, if you get any of these, we can just hit yes on them because they do come from trusted publishers. And I'm going to skip all this because obviously installing, you know, software and drivers, it's pretty ubiquitous at this point. You're just going to follow the prompts, read what it tells you to do, and you know, you get the idea. I'm sure most of you have done this already. Actually, you know what, before I do this, there is one thing I wanted to show. I'm going to exit out of all this stuff, and if we right click and go to Task Manager down on the taskbar here, this little message will just say cancel on because it canceled out of the installation, but this is kind of neat. This, if you didn't know, this shows you how much processor usage and how much memory usage you have and how many processes are being ran right now. I have 8% of my physical memory used. That's 8% of 6 gigabytes. So while that doesn't sound like it's a lot, that is actually a lot. CPU usage is completely zero right now, which is great. If I go over to performance, we can see that's 1.34 gigabytes of RAM. So if you only had 2 gigs in this machine, obviously it's still going to only use 8% because it scales the usage based upon the total amount of memory. But if we take a look at that, 1.35 for other machines is quite a bit. But this is why you want a good machine. What all this basically means is it's fast as hell. Like, I can go down here right now and go to shut down just to show you how quickly this thing shuts down. So now we're completely off. I'm going to push the power button now, and we're going to load from cold boot straight into BIOS, straight into Windows, just to show you how quick this thing is. And to think it may be even quicker once I actually get the new hardware here. Bam. That's not from sleep, that's from a straight cold boot, from straight power off. So that's really fast in my opinion. This is probably faster than a Lenovo computer I fixed a few months ago, which was pretty fast. Now, I've always had a chance to get into Windows fairly quickly for the last few years because of the SSD, and when I first put it in, I'm like, wow, this is crazy fast. But I still had to get through BIOS, a traditional BIOS, and now that I don't have to worry about that, it's certainly much quicker. So let me go ahead and get that graphics driver installed so I'm not delaying anymore. I'll mention while it's doing it, one of the things it's installing is a Intel Display Audio driver. And in a nutshell, what that is it allows you to pass audio over the HDMI cable to your device. So if I had speakers on my TV over here, I can actually use the onboard speakers and get the sound from the computer through that single HDMI cable up to the TV. And the cool thing about that is while the computer itself does have an HDMI port on it, the graphics card doesn't, but it does have a DVI port, and that DVI port will actually allow you to pass audio through it as well, which I thought was pretty neat. But that's not a feature that I use, since I do have a pretty good sound system and I have that THX card. I actually use that for my sound, and my TV is just picture. There's not even any speakers on it. But if you did have this in a living room situation or something hooked up to just a regular TV like that, it would be great. Or maybe if you have a connection going to a stereo using HDMI, that of course would work just as well. So now obviously we're back in the Windows here, and one of the things you'll notice, the bottom of the screen here is a little different. The taskbar actually has the Windows Aero display enabled, so you can actually see the little backdrop is kind of translucent through the bottom over here, and that's a good indication that the graphics driver is working. So I'll go into computer again, and that was right click on computer and go to properties, and it says your Windows Experience Index needs to be refreshed because there's been some hardware changes. So we will go ahead and refresh that now and see what happens. And kind of as expected, 6.8 is a pretty good number, and of course 6.8 is the rating of the lowest sub-score, and that was what it gave the graphics and the graphics, gaming graphics I should say. So we'll have to see if I use the NVIDIA card here, if I get the same results, better results, or worse results. What do you think I'll get? I have a feeling it's going to be the same, but we'll see. So of course, one of the things I'll need to do is upgrade this video card at some point, because I really would love that number to be the 7.8. So I'll need to get something that's on par with the rest of the system here. But at any rate, what can we do now? Well, obviously there's a lot more drivers to still install. We have some other little things we can play with. The one thing I do want to do is get a baseline for the actual hardware that's here. So I'll go back into that card here, and I have this crystal disk mark. We'll open that up and we'll run the 64-bit edition. And again, I'm not going to let this go through the whole thing, but we're going to test drive C, which is our SSD. It is at 32% capacity, and we'll leave everything else set the way it is and just hit all. Now this is going to check the sequential read speed for the read and write for 32 queues of one thread. Same thing with a 4 kilobyte random read and write, sequential read and write, and random 4K. And we'll hit all and just let it do this test so we can actually see how fast this SSD is. And these will be numbers that we'll look at now. I might actually do this test again once I actually get the new SSD in. But we'll let this do its thing, and we'll come back with some results in just a moment. Here's some baseline numbers. Not really going to point too much of this out, but we'll just take a look at what's the read versus the write. The top number 496.8 versus 155.8. So the read speed was obviously greater than the write speed, but that makes a lot of sense. However, from the manufacturer's website, I believe the read speed for this particular drive should be about 550 and the write speed should be about 500. So I'm not sure why I'm not getting this correct speed on the right side of it, but that's neither here nor there. The idea is just to get a baseline number for this particular build, so when I put the faster drive in, we can see how much faster it actually is. Just for ha-has, I ran the same Crystal Disk Mark program on the USB disk that's in here, and you can see the numbers are substantially lessened. Another program I want to try to play with a little bit is this Heavy Load X64. This is a 64-bit CPU load program that places a pretty large load on the processor, memory, disk drive, all that stuff, so we can get a good feel for how well the system performs as a whole. And this will also put enough stress on the machine to kind of heat everything up so we can see exactly how well everything's running. And to do that, we just hit start up here, this little play button. And before, when I did this, it obviously didn't have this 3D rendered box because I didn't have the graphics drivers installed. So it actually had just various lines. It looked like a screensaver. But you can see by this graph, the frames per second are up at 90%. It's actually 90% CPU usage, and it's like 6,000 frames a second. And the CPU usage is the actual red bar here, and it's up to 70%. So that's it's pretty good. I can actually go into the task manager here, and we can look and see, yep, 66% use. Still 1.37 gigabytes of memory, and all the little graphs over here for each thread. Now again, this is a 4-core processor with dual threads each core, so there's 8 processes that can be ran kind of at once here. And we can just take a look at that graph. You may also hear the fans kicking up a little bit here. And I can just let this run as long as I'd like it to. The longer it runs, the more I can guarantee the stability of the system. And we don't want to see the blue screen to death here. We don't want to see these fans kick into high gear and like cool the system down that much. Obviously, if it needs it, we'll want that to happen, but we don't want it to get that warm, obviously. I probably won't let this go too much longer. It's already been running for 1 minute and 43 seconds as of now. And I did this for about an hour and a half earlier today. Full disclosure, this is actually the second time I put Windows on this particular machine. I really couldn't wait last night. I wanted to see if it would work, so of course I went ahead and did that when the camera wasn't rolling. And it got not as far as I did with this shoot. I didn't get the graphics driver installed, and a couple of little things I didn't get set up yet, intentionally. I didn't want to go too far because I wanted to have the audience to watch it, and but I did want to jump into it a little bit and see how everything runs. So there isn't any real point to running this too much longer, but I did want you to see how this works. So now I'm just going to exit out of all this and just continue on with the rest of the installation of all the files. I'm not going to install the onboard sound because I do want to put my the Sound Blaster card in here. And once I get everything done and restarted and everything, I'll probably take out the stock graphics driver here, and we'll go with the NVIDIA card. As I started loading the drivers for obviously the components of the system here, I quickly realized there was some things in BIOS that I kind of overlooked, and not enabling those, of course, won't allow me to install the prerequisite drivers because the hardware just isn't present. So of course I went back into here and was playing around, and this was kind of late last night, and well, here it is later on this afternoon already, next day. And you can actually see possibly here that the chassis 1 and chassis 2 fan are in the red. And the reason, because I actually found a calibration mode where it tests the high range and the low range of these particular fans and put them into that low range mode. That makes this thing pretty near silent. These fans are hardly turning in here. You can see 573 RPMs, that's pretty slow. And that's great, but of course, if this machine starts to heat up, they'll automatically kick into a higher speed, so that's, of course, a good thing. But looking around here, you could see I set the Easy System Tuning to ASUS Optimal. I'm not sure if I pointed it out last time. I also enabled XMP, which gives me the higher speed to my memory. I went into Easy Tuning Wizard at the top here, and I set up all the stuff in here, which was pretty easy. It's just a quick follow through. I'm sure I mentioned this already, but this showed you how you can do a really basic overclock on the system. I also turned on the Intel Rapid Storage technology. Now, turning this on enabled the RAID controller as opposed to the AHCI controller, and of course, since that's what was initially enabled, Windows installed onto the AHCI mode, and of course now this is turned on and RAID's enabled. I can no longer boot into Windows, so I should have checked this first before I installed. Fortunately, I didn't really get too far with anything in there, And I don't really have any problems completely reinstalling Windows because obviously it went by super fast, so that's not an issue. You may also notice over here there's no boot drives because I have actually completely removed everything from the system and kind of started from square one. And I'll pan the camera down in just a moment. In advanced mode, you're going to get a lot more things to adjust. For example, I'm not running at 4,000 megahertz anymore. I'm running at 4,007 megahertz. I know it's a slight increase, but just using a stock cooler in here, I can't go too much faster. But underneath advanced here, you can actually go in and adjust all the little bits and pieces of this computer. And most good BIOS systems have something like this where you can go in and adjust this. Now you can see the SATA mode is definitely set for RAID, and a lot of these other ones here are turned off for now because I don't need them, especially since I don't have that M.2 SSD in here. But you can go in and actually rename the ports, so I actually name the port that my SSD will be hooked up to the actual name of the SSD. And pretty easy to get through. You could change the M.2 port if I want to, but I don't have anything hooked to it, so that's kind of a moot point. But you would actually be able to go through here and verify everything that's hooked into the system, which is nice. Under PCH configuration, I just set the Rapid Technology stuff in here to on, and the Smart Connect stuff I turned on. All these different things, these are all just different technologies that you have to have the right kind of hardware and obviously software to be able to use. A lot of them, it just puts the computer into a low power mode when you're in standby. It's especially helpful if you have a laptop or if you're running off of battery power. I'm obviously plugged in, but power is power. I want to be able to save as much as possible, even though I do have this thing turned up in some ways. I have it turned down in others. Just going into CPU configuration, you can see there's some things in here we can turn on and not. Again, I didn't really want to make this into a complete every single little option in here type of video, because obviously your mileage will vary. You may or may not need some of these features, but since I have some of them, I'm going to turn them on. Under AI Tweaker, one of the things I can turn on is the CPU ratio unlock, which it tells you here that enables this item may unlock the overclocking capabilities of K-series CPUs, and supported processors include the i5-4670, the i5-4690, and the i7-4770. Okay, well, I have the i7-4790K, so it would be in my best interest to enable that. Pretty much, that's kind of the only thing I really did. I didn't get to show you, but in the advanced section here under one of these, I was able to go in and actually disable the onboard HD controller because I'm not going to be using that. And I didn't see anything to disable onboard video. It seems like that's an automatic thing. So once the new video card's in here, that should automatically pick that up. We'll test that out in a moment. This NVMe configuration, this is going to come into place once we have the M.2 SSD installed in this machine, because that's the interface that uses. But that's pretty much it for this. So what I'll do now is just do some quick camera adjustments here, and I'll show you the inside of the case where we have right now. Now I kind of just stripped, not everything, but I stripped all the wires out. They're sitting up on top here for the power cables, just to get them out of the way for now. I had to hook in the wire for the video card, which is this guy here. Obviously this could do 2 video cards. Power cable for the SATA connections up on top. Now the focus now is to get the video card, the sound card, and my large terabyte hard drive all installed into this machine, so I can actually properly configure Windows. I do apologize, this is something I probably should have done from the get-go, but I really wanted to see what the capabilities of this motherboard were on its own, as well as just to make sure the system was working good as a whole. You know, obviously if I go into Windows now as it is, it's going to install some type of graphics driver. Obviously it's just going to get me basic video, and I would need to install the Intel driver to actually get the full features of that card. And then obviously if I did that and then put the card in, I'd have to uninstall all that. So it's just easier just to start the installation off directly with the actual card installed in here. So I do need to do a couple more camera adjustments here just to get a little closer in. I'm going to do that right now. That's seemingly a little bit better. So one of the first things I'll do is install the sound card, because that's going to go up here into this slot. I want that furthest away from the video card so I have some room here for heat. We have the HD header. This is for the audio ports up front. They run down here. That's going to have to get connected to this card, so I'm going to do that now. Of course, I'm going to put my wrist strap on. Okay, so looking at this card, we'll see this is where the header is going to connect to. It's a keyed connection, so one of the pins is missing. On this over here, there is one blocked out, so that's where that's going to connect to. The HD audio wording actually faces down on this card, so I'm just going to push that in like that. And this connector here is just going to slide into that slot there. One thing I will say about these PCIe X1 connectors is they're nice and small, so that makes the insertion really easy. That's it. Just push it straight down. And of course we're going to take one of those little thumb screws and we're going to screw in the top up here. This doesn't need to be crazy tight, so I'm not going to put the screwdriver to it, but I am going to tighten it down pretty well. And of course I'm just trying to do this so my arm's not in the way of the camera. I should mention that the power cable is completely unplugged from this, as well as all the other connections. You don't want to hook up any devices to your computer while it's still running, obviously, or even powered up, or even getting just standby power, because that's never a good idea. And by the way, since I'm talking about that, there's an older video I did on this channel about replacing a LCD screen on a Lenovo laptop, and I get people calling me out all the time on that you didn't disconnect the battery inside the laptop. Well, guess what? That's the first computer I've worked on that didn't have an external battery that you would just pop out. And normally you need to take the external battery out to get to the screws behind to take the computer apart. So I always disconnect the battery. That particular build, I didn't take the battery out because I just completely forgot about it, honestly. And all the time I get people calling me out, and they must not have annotations turned on, because I'm quite sure that video has annotations on there mentioning, yes, I forgot to take the battery out. Yes, you need to do that. So if you're one of those people that called me out on it, thank you. I realized that after the fact, but that video is quite old now and people still call me out on it. It's kind of funny. But anyway, now we got the video card here and the power cable's up at the end over here. So we're just going to take one of these connectors, doesn't matter which. Now this is either a 8-pin or a 6-pin. We need the 6-pin, and that just plugs in like so. Again, it's keyed, so it can't go in the wrong way. And this card is very similar, it just has a much longer header, and there's also a locking tab here. This one's a nice design because the tab can be accessed from either side of the card, which is definitely really nice. And also, it's not one that's spring fit, so you can actually just leave it unlocked if you want. But we're going to unlock it right now, and this card is going to go straight in here. Now the one good thing about this case being flipped the other way is, since this is the bottom and this is the top side, the pretty side of the video card actually faces up. So if you look into the case, you'll actually see that. On the other cards, the other cases, since this is the top, this is the side you'll see, and I don't know. That's the one thing I do like about this case. It seems like it's a lot nicer looking that way. Plus, the way I have it at my desk, it seems like it works out much better for me. So I don't really think I've come across another case that has that kind of a configuration, but no big deal. Also, I'll mention a lot of the newer video cards are double width. Not necessarily the card itself, but the cooler. So you'll notice that might take up 2 of these slots, but that, again, that's fine. Now what's nice here is the way this power cable is going to work. I can actually just tuck this up in the top over here, and it's out of the way of the fan. And that's a good thing, because that's going to help not restrict airflow. And speaking of which, back here you could see the 2 wires coming off the motherboard where it splits to go to these 2 fans. I've actually just wrapped those around the fan just to keep them out the way. The new case I get will definitely have much better wire management in it and stuff. Alright, so that's those 2 cards. Unfortunately, I don't have any covers for the slots over here that are unused, so I'm just going to leave those as is. I'm sure I'll dig up somewhere in the Empire dirt here somewhere. Now the next thing to do would be to put the hard drive cage into place. I do have two options. I can either put the top drive bay here back up in this location and use that and just not use it from the front, or I can put the cage back down at the bottom again and just reuse that, which is probably the option I'm going to do. And that just keyholes in. There's one screw here to hold it in, and you can see the light here coming through where the keyholes are, so that's just going to come in, slide right in. And I'll possibly pass these wires into it first so they come out. That I have to see. The wires they gave me that came with the system aren't the longest. The ones we're using are definitely much longer. I just don't know if these are SATA 3 rated or not, so I'll have to check that one out. It just says serial ATA. It doesn't really tell me if it's 1, 2, or 3. I would assume it shouldn't really make much difference, but you know what they say about people who assume. So let me go ahead and get that cage put into place and figure out which kind of wiring I want to use here. Now one thing I like right away is, since this motherboard is shorter, the memory is in a better location. Before, it was just right at the edge of this cage here, and while it did fit, if you wanted to get this last piece of RAM out, it was kind of a pain in the neck to get to, but luckily it's a lot easier. Now the 1 terabyte hard drive, we have these little plastic rails that just simply sit into these screw holes here. There's one for each side, and this just literally slides right into place. So we're going to come along here like this, and there is 2 spots here, but I'm going to just put this into the top one like so. I mentioned the other motherboard had 6 SATA connections. This one only has 4, so obviously I'm going to use one for this, one for the SSD, and I have to get a optical drive that's SATA rated. And I also have somewhere here a external hard drive docking bay that I can put into this thing that's SATA rated. I have to figure out if I want to use that or not. It's only 120 gigabyte, but it is quite useful for a lot of things I do, so that may end up in this case. Now I don't really have a good way to route these wires, so I'm just gonna come across the front of the case here. It's kind of ugly, but it's gonna have to do. I might actually just come along the bottom here and come up. The SATA wires I have, now that the motherboard, the video card's here, they're not going to really fit that well, so I'll have to figure out what I'm going to do with those. So originally I had the SSD just kind of stuck here with some Velcro, and unfortunately I don't have any more Velcro, so I don't have the pieces to stick on here, and the ones I had just came right off. So this is just going to sit kind of loose. As soon as I put it under the desk, I'll sit it into position, and you know, it's not going to really move, so I'm not too concerned with it. But you know, the new cases, they already have spots for this, and like I said, I'm not even actually use this once I get the M.2 SSD. This is will be kind of a moot point. I will point out while I'm in here, I've seen a lot of cases where you can put a bunch of these in here. Like sometimes they have them up here along the back, so there'll be one there, and then one on top of something like this. So they're kind of cool for that. And the one case I looked at actually had this exact SSD, and they had 2 of them stuck in the back here, and I'm assuming they had it in some kind of a RAID configuration, like striped or maybe even mirrored for data redundancy. Definitely would be a good idea to do that. If this was larger, because I am getting a 250 or 256 gigabyte M2, what I would have done if this was of the same capacity, I could have used it as a backup drive. So in case one of them went, I still have the other one, but I'm not going to really worry about that because I do have backups, and I managed to save all my data the last time I had a problem with this thing, so not super worried about that. And while I'm on the subject of SATA connectors, you can see the power cable. It looks like an L. There's one little spot over here in the side where it has this little key, so that prevents you from being able to put this in the wrong direction. So you see this should be able to just slide in like that. And I definitely like these connectors better than the old school ones for sure. They definitely end up being a lot neater. Now I just got to figure out how I'm going to get this other one to connect behind it here. That should just be able to pop it right in like this. Of course I can't really see exactly what I'm doing with having the camera in the way. And of course it doesn't help because the key is the wrong way. See, this is what happens when you do it blind. Okay, now that's going to just sit like that. I'm just going to fold this wire, and really isn't anything else to add now at this point. So I'll come around the side over here, and I'll show you the back of the computer now. We'll need to put an adapter on here to convert this DVI port to a VGA port so I can hook it to my KVM switch. And here's that adapter. So that's pretty easy to do. We'll just stick this on the back here. Again, it's a keyed connector, it only goes one way. And then I have to connect my keyboard and mouse and my power cable. I need to push this out of the way to do that. I might even stand it up. All right, we're back in BIOS, which is a good thing because now we're running off of the video card. And of course, we can go through and make a couple more adjustments in here. I'm gonna go back into advanced mode, and I just figured under system agent configuration, there's some graphics configuration in here, and I can set the primary display to PCIe. This is what I was looking for before and I could not find it. Now there is a mode in here where you can actually use both video cards at the same time if you wanted to do multiple monitor support, but I can already do multiple monitors with my graphics card, so that's not necessary. And of course, just gonna play around in here, see if there's anything else I need to configure. Doesn't seem like there's anything here I need to really worry about. Certain things are disabled, and well, not everything I need, like VT-D. Honestly, don't even really know what it is, so I'll just leave it. Some of these things, it tells you at the bottom here what it does or why you need it, so then you can make a conscious decision what you want to use. But beyond that, you know, I would just say if you don't know what it is, just leave it alone. But a lot of these other things, rapid start, all these different pieces, we'll have to check it out. And I did notice when this started up, it came up with a little bit extra text, and that was for the RAID controller. Now I'm not actually going to use any of the RAID modes, but you do need to have RAID set up to be able to use the rapid start. And from my understanding, there's a little partition that it makes based upon the size of the memory in the computer. And that, what happens is when you shut the computer down, it writes all the RAM to the hard drive. So when you power the machine back up, it just takes the contents off of the actual hard drive, loads them back into RAM, and then continues to load the computer. So you should have the experience like you never actually shut the machine down. And what that actually does is causes the computer to go into a lower power state, so you don't have to keep, you know, the computer actually running. And that might be a good thing in case you actually lose power. You still have the contents of RAM on memory, so when you actually come back up from having power, you should be able to still continue where you were. And all this has to do with just making the system speedier upon restarting. And since I do use the sleep feature, I figured that's definitely a good thing to play with. Now I did play in here and set the SATA support for boot drive only, and the USB support for partial initialization. So that means that it's only going to initialize the USB ports if it has a keyboard and mouse hooked to it. And you know, all these things are just things you'll want to play with. Like I had initially disabled CSM, which is a compatibility support module, because I figured I would have all the appropriate drivers and everything installed in the Windows. When I got into it, it wouldn't be a big deal. Unfortunately, that was not the case, so I do need to keep that enabled. I guess I have a legacy mouse, or who knows what the thing is for this particular build for right now. Once I get it onto the actual desk it's going to sit at, I might be able to disable that again once all the drivers are set up. But anyway, that's enough of this. I'm going to exit out of here now. I'm going to put the USB drive back in the computer and continue loading Windows on it just as we did earlier. While this is loading up here, I'll mention I read somewhere about the rapid start technology and that whole suite in general, that one of the things you can do is use your SSD as cache for your hard drive. And there's a lot of newer drives on the market that are considered hybrid drives, and it's actually just a traditional drive with a small SSD cache area that the computer can write to cache, and then as the platter spins, basically, it can go ahead and fill those spaces back onto the drive. Now, that's good because it can definitely speed the system up because you're not waiting for that hard drive to be accessed. And what I've also read it does is it takes your most used files and keeps them in a little bit of that portion of the cache. So you should be able to see pretty good speeds off of one of those hybrid drives. Certainly not as fast as a straight SSD, but definitely one that would work well enough. So yeah, anyway, now I'm going to go ahead and do like we did earlier. I'm just going to go ahead and delete all these partitions on here. And to do that, again, it was drive options, and we're going to go delete. And I'm just going to delete all these because there's no real worry about all these. Now it did do two things here. We can see there's actually two drives. The disk 0 is the SSD, and disk 1 is the 1 terabyte drive. Both of these at one point did have data in the old computer. I've already recovered the stuff on there, so even though there was stuff on these, I'm not too concerned with it. We can go ahead and hit next. We're going to install on disk 0. And again, just going to let this go ahead and do its thing. We'll see you when Windows is up. Alright, now that I got all the drivers installed and everything's been properly configured, of course the computer reset multiple times during this process. It took me maybe a good half an hour or so just to get everything finally tweaked the way I'd like it to be. And of course, it's never really a done issue until you get the thing in place and you start to really work with it daily. But anyway, I'm going to turn this on right now and show you the little option ROM that comes up. So first you get the ASUS logo here, and then it's going to load up a RAID driver. So if you press Control I, you can get into that configuration here. And this is where you would configure your RAID volume. Now, I'm not going to be doing that simply because I don't have multiple drives in this machine set up for that purpose. Maybe down the road I may do something like that, but for now I'm just going to leave it as is. But I don't want this coming up every time the computer loads. So if I exit out of here and wait till the computer restarts, when you get to the ASUS logo, you can get back into BIOS here, and under advanced mode and under boot, there's an option here for option ROM messages. We're going to disable that and then exit out of here. Of course, saving changes. So now what happens is when this loads up, you're still going to get the same ASUS logo, but you're going to see it just a little longer than you normally would have, and that option's coming up in the background, you're just not seeing it. There's no way to really make it go any faster than that, but that's really plenty fast enough. I mean, that's definitely goes through post and BIOS much quicker than the old machine did. And as you can see here, we're pretty much already into the desktop. Now to verify the stuff here, we're going to have to go into Control Panel. Now there is one thing that's coming up, this message about this log file that's missing, so I'm going to have to play around with that and find out what's causing that. This is one of the things about setting up a computer from the get-go that you may have problems with. It could be conflicting drivers, it could be who knows what, so I'm definitely going to have to figure out exactly what that is and what's causing it. But for now, I'll just hit OK on these to get these out of the way. And we'll go down to Control Panel here, and we're going to go into System. Now I already ran the experience, and that came up as being a 6.9 with the graphics card, and you remember with the onboard video it was 6.8, so that's a very minor increase. I think the clock on the onboard was 700, and this one, the added on card, 733. Once I get a new graphics card, that number will shoot up, so hopefully pretty well. But anyway, we're going to go into Device Manager from here. Of course, there is another way you can get in here, but you can see there's no drivers that are missing, and you would know that because this would be open, let's say, and there would be a little exclamation point here indicating that there's an issue, but all those are fine. So I'll have to figure out what that little error message is that's coming up. Another thing here is you'll see this little X. This is actually the fan speed controller. So if I want, I can set this to silent, standard, performance, and full speed. You'll hear that computer throttling up in the background, hopefully. And you can actually click over here and change what interface you had. So that was Fan Expert 2 Plus. There's the EPU mode, which is what you had in the BIOS to go between performance, your power saving, and away mode. And then you also have this button that you can click and bring you into the full performance and power settings mode. And there's quite a bit you can play around with in here. You can set USB 3.0 boost, and you can see the core processor speeds, and you know, there's a lot of tweaks, I guess you could say, you can mess with this. Now, of course, I don't have any USB 3.0 devices on here to play with this particular function, but this is all stuff that may or may not be necessary, because you can set a lot of this in BIOS, but then you'd have to go back into BIOS to readjust it. So being able to set this here within Windows is kind of a nice feature. The term bloatware comes into mind when you buy a new computer, and of course you have all these functions that you may not need. So luckily we can set which programs we want to actually have installed here. A little quick aside, the driver for the sound card actually asked me if I wanted to have any like the documentation installed. I don't need that, so I just disabled that. The video card asked if I wanted the 3D Vision driver to be installed. I don't need that. So there's little things that you can adjust to get you where you wanted. So now we're on the internet. We have all the drivers loaded. The really only thing to do now is to actually set up the updates. So I'll let this thing run probably all night, and it'll probably take a couple days to do all the updates. I'll get my virus programs on here. I'll get any other little tweak programs that I'd like. I do have to get the other hard drive set up. So to do that, we're going to go into computer, but you need to actually right click on computer and go into manage. And this is going to bring up the computer management section, and you'll need to go to disk management. And this will show you all the drives in the system, which of course there's only 2. And I'm going to go to disk 1 here and actually go to new simple volume and hit next. Next, assign letter D, fine, next. This is going to be NTFS. We'll rename this volume as being the data drive. If I could spell properly. And we're going to do a quick format and hit next. And what this is going to do is prepare that drive and format it. And we can see that that's already done. So now if I go into the Windows Explorer, we can actually see now that I have that D drive set up. Now that's going to serve as, again, data. I'm going to move some program files over to there just to keep some space off of the SSD. Now the good thing about using Windows 10 is it figures out that you have an SSD and sets some settings in the computer appropriate to that. Windows 7 doesn't do that, so there are some tweaks I need to do in order to enable or disable certain features. One of the problems about SSDs is they only have a limited time you can write to them. It's a lot. I mean, it's like 40 gigabytes of data a day or whatever it is. So to prolong the life of it, there's certain functions that you want to disable or put onto another drive, like your browser. You might want to install that onto the hard drive instead. In the prior build, I had something called a RAM disk, which actually was a virtual disk that stored onto RAM, and it was just a 2 gigabyte disk. So that meant that I only had 14 gigs available to Windows, but that 2 gigs was super fast, and I actually installed Chrome onto that, so it allowed me to have a virtual space that I can save all the browser cache to, and then I can actually set it to clear that cache out once I restart the computer, and that's just extra writes that don't have to be written to the SSD. Now I know a lot of that sounds very technical. Those are all what I'll call power user tweaks. It's something that the normal user might not need, but somebody who likes to tweak and set settings the way they like it to be would be able to go in and do. But at any rate, I don't really have much more I wanted to show in this particular video, and simply because, well, it is quite long as it is already. If you stuck around this long, thank you. But I have a lot of editing and stuff that I have to get into place, and I want to get that done as soon as possible so I can spend the rest of my night just relaxing and not editing video. There are quite a bit. So anyway, again, thanks for watching. We'll see you next video. If you like these kind of videos, subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. If you have anything to contribute, I always love comments. I definitely try to reply to as many as possible. I'm not super popular yet where I'm getting hundreds of comments a day that I can't really respond to, but I do try my best. Well, anyway, we'll see you guys next video, and thanks for watching.